The radio crackled with controlled panic as the message came through about combat ineffectiveness, 3 urgent surgical cases, 2 routine casualties, and an inability to move without taking more losses. The enemy had zeroed in on every position. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison pressed himself flat behind a mud wall that was disintegrating under sustained machine gun fire from a PKM. His SEAL team had been pinned in this Afghan compound for 40 minutes with ammunition running critically low, casualties mounting, and enemy fighters continuing to pour in as if they had an endless supply. The quick reaction force couldn't reach them because enemy positions controlled every approach. Air support was 20 minutes out, but they didn't have 20 minutes. The sniper who had been overwatching from the ridge went silent 10 minutes ago with unknown status, probably dead. They were out of options and out of time. That's when Morrison heard something that didn't fit the chaos around him. A different weapon signature emerged, not the sharp crack of assault rifles or the hammering of machine guns. This was rhythmic, measured, and deliberate, a semi-automatic precision rifle firing in controlled cadence from somewhere high and distant. With each report, an enemy position fell silent. The SEAL next to Morrison, Petty Officer Chen, risked a glance over the crumbling wall and reported that the machine gun nest on the eastern ridge just went dark, as did the RPG team on the roof, and the sniper who had been hammering them from the tower just disappeared. Morrison didn't understand what was happening, but he knew opportunity when he heard it. He ordered all elements to prepare to move on his command, recognizing that someone just gave them a window. What happened next wasn't just marksmanship but a masterclass in how one shooter with the right weapon and absolute determination can change the outcome of a battle everyone thought was already lost. Staff Sergeant Monica Blake had been watching the SEAL team situation deteriorate for 37 minutes from her position 800 meters away on the opposite ridgeline. She'd seen them get ambushed moving through the compound, watched them take casualties trying to establish defensive positions, and counted the enemy fighters flowing into the area like water finding cracks. Her original mission was simple: provide overwatch for the SEAL element conducting a high-value target raid in the valley below. She was supposed to observe, report threats, and maybe take a few precision shots if absolutely necessary, a standard supporting role for a sniper attached to a SEAL operation. But 30 minutes ago, her spotter, Corporal Davis, took a round through the shoulder from an enemy sniper who'd located their hide. Davis was stable but combat ineffective, with bleeding controlled but unable to continue the mission. The team medic was with the SEALs getting shredded in the compound, and the enemy was systematically destroying Morrison's team. Monica had made a decision that would either save lives or get her court-martialed. She was going to take every shot she could make, regardless of doctrine, regardless of ammunition conservation, regardless of the fact that engaging this many targets would definitely compromise her position. Her weapon was in State Route 25 semi-automatic sniper rifle chambered in 7.62 by 51 mm NATO, not the bolt-action long-range precision rifle most snipers carried. The State Route 25 traded some accuracy at extreme distance for the ability to fire rapidly, to engage multiple targets without working a bolt between shots, to maintain pressure on an enemy force. At 800 meters, it was well within the weapon's effective range, and Monica Blake was very good at putting rounds exactly where she wanted them. She'd already identified 32 enemy positions through her scope: machine gun nests, sniper hides, RPG teams, mortar crews, and fighting positions where enemy fighters were pouring fire into the trapped SEALs. 32 targets meant 32 problems that needed solving immediately. Most snipers would pick the highest value targets like leaders, heavy weapons, and direct threats, then engage methodically while conserving ammunition and maintaining concealment. Monica was about to do something different. She was going to work through every single target she could acquire as fast as she could shoot accurately, and she was going to keep shooting until either the enemy was destroyed or she ran out of ammunition. She checked her ammunition load, 8 20-round magazines totaling 160 rounds against 30-plus enemy fighters. The math wasn't encouraging, but math had never been particularly good at accounting for skill, determination, and absolute refusal to watch good men die when she could do something about it. Monica settled behind her rifle, controlled her breathing, and began the work of systematic violence. The first target was a PKM machine gunner on the eastern ridge at 780 meters out. He was laying down sustained fire on the SEALs' position, keeping them pinned and preventing movement. Through her scope, Monica could see the brass casings ejecting in a steady stream as he poured rounds into the compound. She placed her crosshairs on his center mass, accounting for the slight breeze pushing right to left, calculated the holdover for distance, and pressed the trigger. The State Route 25 barked once, and through the scope, she watched the machine gunner jerk backward, his weapon falling silent, the sustained fire that had been hammering Morrison's position suddenly gone. She didn't wait to confirm the kill. She was already transitioning to Target 2, an RPG gunner on a rooftop 820 meters northeast, preparing to fire another rocket into the compound. She pressed the trigger, the semi-automatic action cycled smoothly, and the rifle settled back on target almost immediately. The RPG gunner dropped his rocket launcher, which clattered unfired to the roof. Target 3 was a sniper in a window at 765 meters, partially concealed where she could only see his rifle barrel and part of his head. It was a difficult shot but manageable. She fired, and the enemy sniper disappeared from the window, his rifle falling into view, no longer aimed at the trapped SEALs. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio with confusion evident, asking any unknown friendly element engaging enemy positions to please identify themselves. Monica didn't answer because she was too busy acquiring Target 4, a mortar crew setting up 850 meters away, positioning their tube to drop high explosive rounds directly into the compound. She engaged the gunner first, then the assistant gunner who tried to take over. 2 shots, 2 seconds apart, and the mortar was no longer a threat. Now the enemy was starting to react. They'd figured out they were taking fire from somewhere but hadn't pinpointed her location yet. Fighters were moving to cover, becoming harder targets but also reducing their effectiveness against the SEALs. Monica exploited their confusion while they searched for her, systematically removing their heavy weapons positions. Another machine gun nest with 2 shooters required 3 rounds total, including 1 follow-up shot. An RPG team relocating to a better firing position got caught in the open, 3 targets requiring 5 rounds to ensure all 3 were down. Her rifle was getting hot from the sustained rate of fire. The State Route 25 was designed for this kind of work, but she was pushing it hard, firing faster than normal doctrine called for, but normal doctrine didn't account for watching an entire SEAL team about to get overrun. She'd fired 32 rounds in 4 minutes, and 16 enemy fighters were no longer combat effective. The pressure on Morrison's team was decreasing with each shot, and she could see them starting to consolidate, to move wounded to better cover, to prepare for extraction. But the enemy wasn't done. A new element was moving into position, 8 fighters with what looked like better training, better weapons, and better tactical movement. They were flanking toward the compound from the north, using covered routes and moving in coordinated bounds, and they'd figured out the general direction the precision fire was coming from. Several of them broke off and started to climb toward Monica's ridgeline with assault rifles ready. She had a choice: focus on the immediate threat to the SEALs or deal with the fighters closing on her position. She chose the SEALs because they had wounded, they couldn't move, and she was mobile and could relocate if necessary. Monica engaged the flanking element with rapid precision. The lead fighter dropped at 790 meters, his partner dove for cover but she caught him mid-movement, and the third fighter made it behind a rock but when he exposed himself to return fire, she was waiting with her crosshairs already positioned. The State Route 25 was performing flawlessly despite the heat and sustained firing. Brass casings piled up around her position, each one representing an enemy fighter who was no longer threatening the men trapped below. But ammunition was becoming critical. She'd burned through 5 magazines, 100 rounds, with 3 magazines left totaling 60 rounds, and there were still at least 10 to 12 enemy fighters actively engaging the SEALs, plus the unknown number climbing toward her position. Monica made another tactical decision. She couldn't save every round, she had to keep shooting as long as there were targets threatening Morrison's team. She reloaded smoothly with muscle memory taking over and resumed firing. A fighter trying to maneuver closer to the compound went down, another machine gunner setting up in a new position was eliminated before he could fire a burst, and an enemy officer trying to coordinate the assault from behind cover found the cover inadequate when Monica's 7.62mm round punched through the mud brick he was hiding behind. The enemy assault was collapsing, not because they were cowards, as these were experienced fighters who'd been winning the battle 5 minutes ago, but because they couldn't fight what they couldn't see, couldn't suppress a threat they couldn't locate, and couldn't advance when their leaders and heavy weapons kept disappearing under precision fire from 800 meters away. Morrison's team exploited the breathing room, and the SEALs began returning organized fire, no longer just defending but actively clearing threats. Their training and equipment were superior, they just needed the opportunity to use it, and Monica was giving them that opportunity, one trigger press at a time. Then the enemy fighters climbing toward her position opened fire. Rounds cracked over Monica's head, impacting the rocks around her position. They'd gotten close, maybe 300 meters below her ridge, and they were shooting with the desperation of fighters who knew they were losing and needed to kill the sniper who was destroying their ambush. She had to move because this position was compromised, but she also had clear shots on the fighters coming up the hill, and the SEALs still needed her. Covering fire. Monica made a decision that prioritized mission over personal safety. She would stay in this position and keep shooting until either the enemy was defeated or she was forced to displace by direct assault. She transitioned to the closer threats, the fighters climbing toward her. At 300 meters, the state Route 25 was devastatingly accurate, and she dropped 3 of them in rapid succession, her semi-automatic rate of fire overwhelming their ability to find cover fast enough. The remaining 5 scattered, trying to flank her position from multiple angles with smart tactics, but they were operating in terrain she'd studied for hours while setting up her hide. She knew every rock, every fold in the ground, every approach route. She caught one trying to use a gully for concealment, but he'd forgotten that 800 meters away she had elevated position and could see down into his covered route. Another tried to rush from rock to rock, but Monica's trigger timing caught him mid-bound. Her bolt locked back on an empty magazine. She dropped it, seated a fresh one, released the bolt, and was back in the fight in under 3 seconds. 2 magazines left meant 40 rounds, and the math was getting tighter. Below in the compound, Morrison's team was preparing to move. She could see them organizing casualty evacuation, establishing security, and getting ready to break contact now that the enemy pressure had decreased. But there were still enemy fighters in position, still threats that could shred the SEALs during their withdrawal. Monica identified 5 positions that had clear fields of fire on the compound's only exit route and engaged them systematically. The range was long for rapid shooting, between 800 and 900 meters, but she'd been making these shots for the past 20 minutes. Her holds were automatic now, her trigger control perfect, her breathing synchronized with the rifle's natural pause. 5 positions containing 7 enemy fighters total, and she took them all within 90 seconds, burning through precious ammunition but clearing the path for Morrison's team to move. Morrison's voice came through her radio again, addressing the unknown friendly sniper, saying they were moving to extraction point Alpha, that enemy resistance had collapsed, that he didn't know who she was but she just saved their asses, and thank you. Monica allowed herself one deep breath, the first moment of reduced tension in 30 minutes. The SEALs were moving and would be clear in 5 minutes. The mission was succeeding despite the ambush. That's when she heard the distinctive sound of an RPG launch from somewhere behind her ridgeline. The enemy had gotten smart. While she'd been focused on the valley and the fighters climbing toward her position, another element had circled around, gotten above her, and now they had her dead to rights. The rocket-propelled grenade streaked toward her position, and she had maybe 1 second to react. Monica threw herself sideways, abandoning her carefully constructed hide, scrambling behind a larger boulder as the RPG impacted exactly where she'd been lying 3 seconds earlier. The explosion showered her with rock fragments and concussive force that made her ears ring and her vision blur. She landed hard with her rifle clutched to her chest and immediately rolled to assess the threat. 3 fighters were moving down from the ridge above her. They'd flanked completely around and gotten the high ground, giving them tactical advantage, but they'd made one mistake. They assumed the RPG had killed her. Monica came up behind the boulder with her state Route 25 already shouldered. At 50 meters, the semi-automatic rifle was a devastating close-quarters weapon, and she engaged all 3. Fighters in under 4 seconds with close-range shooting where precision mattered less than speed and aggression. All 3 dropped, with the closest one raising his assault rifle when Monica's round took him in the chest, and his companions never got a shot off. Her magazine was empty again, her last mag with 20 rounds, and she could hear more voices because the enemy wasn't done, they were still hunting her, and her position was completely compromised. Monica made the hardest decision of the engagement. She had to displace immediately or risk being overrun. The SEALs were clear and moving to extraction, so her mission of protecting them was essentially complete. She could withdraw, evade the remaining enemy fighters, and survive. But as she started to move, her radio crackled again with a different voice, younger and stressed. It was Rescue 6-1 saying they were inbound to extract Morrison's team but were taking heavy fire from enemy positions on the ridge with multiple RPGs and at least 2 machine guns. They couldn't land under this fire. Morrison's team had critically wounded who wouldn't survive delay, and they needed immediate fire support on those positions or they would abort. Monica looked down at the valley and could see the helicopter approaching from the south, could see the muzzle flashes from enemy positions she hadn't yet engaged, fighters who'd stayed out of the battle in the compound but were now targeting the extraction bird. She could see Morrison's team in the open with wounded men being carried, completely exposed if the helicopter couldn't land. 20 rounds left, unknown number of enemy fighters targeting the helicopter, her position compromised and enemy closing on her location. The tactical decision was clear: withdraw and save herself, and Morrison's team would have to find another extraction method. Monica Blake had never been particularly good at following tactical decisions when they meant abandoning people who needed her. She found a new firing position with a clear view of the valley, seated her last magazine, and began engaging the anti-aircraft positions. The first target was an RPG team tracking the helicopter, and Monica's round took the gunner as he was aiming, the rocket firing wild into empty sky as he dropped. Second target was a PKM machine gun position pouring tracer fire toward the approaching bird, and she put 3 rounds into the position: gunner, assistant gunner, and ammunition bearer who tried to take over the weapon. The helicopter pilot's voice reported receiving effective fire support and that enemy positions were suppressing, so they were going in. Monica kept shooting. Another RPG team eliminated, a group of fighters trying to maneuver for a better angle on the helicopter caught in the open where she dropped to and forced the others to cover. Her rifle bolt locked back empty. 20 rounds fired in less than 60 seconds, 0 rounds remaining. She was out of ammunition, and enemy fighters were closing on her position from multiple directions. She could hear their voices close enough that language didn't matter because the tone told her everything she needed to know: they were hunting her and they were close. Monica abandoned her state Route 25 because it was too heavy to carry in an evasion scenario and drew her sidearm, a Glock 19 with 3 magazines totaling 45 rounds against an unknown number of enemy fighters. Not great odds, but she'd worked with worse. She moved low and fast, using terrain and rocks for concealment, heading for an alternate extraction point she'd identified during her initial reconnaissance. The helicopter was landing in the valley, and she could hear it over the gunfire, which meant Morrison's team was getting clear. Her job was done, and now she just had to survive. The first enemy fighter came around a rock outcropping 20 meters ahead, and Monica's Glock barked twice in a controlled pair center mass, and he went down before he could bring his assault rifle to bear. His partners heard the shots and started converging. Monica kept moving, shooting when she had to, evading when she could, using every bit of cover the terrain provided. She could hear the helicopter lifting off, which meant Morrison's team was clear. Relief mixed with the adrenaline dump of being hunted through hostile terrain. 2 more fighters appeared on the ridge above her, and Monica engaged from behind cover, her pistol shots forcing them back but not eliminating the threat. They knew where she was now and they were coordinating. Her radio crackled with Morrison's voice addressing the unknown sniper, saying if she was still alive, they had extracted successfully with all wounded accounted for, and asking where she was because they could get the bird back for her. Monica keyed the radio while moving, saying negative, the landing zone was too hot, she was evading to alternate extraction point Bravo, and she'd call when clear. Morrison acknowledged and said they were standing by, and whoever she was, she just killed at least 20 enemy fighters and saved 8 SEALs, and they owed her 23 actually, Monica thought, because she'd been counting. She reached a position where the ridge dropped sharply into a wadi, a dried riverbed that would give her concealed movement away from the enemy concentration. It was a calculated risk because descending into the wadi meant limiting her visibility, but it also meant the enemy would have difficulty tracking her. She slid down the rocky slope, controlling her descent with rocks skittering under her boots. Behind her, she could hear the enemy fighters shouting and coordinating their search. At the bottom of the wadi, Monica moved fast with her weapon up, scanning for threats. The dried riverbed wound through the terrain for nearly a kilometer before opening into an area where helicopter extraction was feasible. She'd covered maybe 300 meters when figures appeared ahead, 3 fighters who'd anticipated her route and set up an ambush. They opened fire simultaneously, and rounds cracked past Monica's head as she dove for cover behind a boulder, returning fire as she moved. Her first shot hit one fighter in the leg, spinning him, her second and third shots caught another in the chest, but the third fighter had good cover and was shooting with disciplined precision. Rounds impacted around Monica's position with chips of rock stinging her face and the heavy crack of assault rifle fire echoing through the narrow wadi. She was pinned with limited ammunition, enemy behind her closing in, and enemy ahead with her trapped between them. Monica checked her pistol, 1 magazine in the weapon and 2 spares remaining, maybe 30 rounds total, not enough for a sustained firefight against multiple opponents. She keyed her radio saying Morrison. She was pinned in the wadi 500 meters north of the compound with multiple hostiles and ammunition critical, and she needed fire support or extraction, preferably both. Morrison's response was immediate, saying Roger. They were turning the bird around. An Apache gunship was 60 seconds out, and asking if she could mark her position. Monica pulled an infrared strobe from her vest, a beacon invisible to the naked eye but clear as day through night vision or aircraft sensors. She activated it and placed it on a rock behind her position, then reported the strobe was active and enemy was north of her position approximately 50 meters. The Apache reported having visual on her strobe and that they were engaging. The Apache attack helicopter came in low and fast with its 30mm chain gun already spinning up. The pilot had identified the enemy fighters through thermal imaging and weapon sensors and was bringing overwhelming firepower to solve Monica's problem. The chain gun erupted with a sound like the world's angriest buzzsaw, and high explosive rounds tore into the wadi ahead of Monica's position, shredding the rock where the enemy fighters had been positioned. The effect was immediate and devastating as the enemy fire stopped abruptly, replaced by the echo of the Apache's guns and the sound of debris raining down. The Apache pilot reported targets destroyed and that she was cleared to move north because the extraction bird was inbound in 30 seconds. Monica didn't waste time and sprinted through the wadi with her weapon up, moving toward the sound of approaching rotors. Behind her, she could hear the Apache engaging remaining enemy fighters who'd been pursuing through the ridgeline, buying her precious seconds with each burst of its gun. The Black Hawk helicopter appeared over the ridge, already descending into the wadi despite the difficult terrain and limited clearance. The pilots were pushing the aircraft's capabilities to get to her, and she reached the extraction point just as the wheels touched down. The crew chief was hanging out the door with his weapon ready, providing security, and Morrison himself was there, reaching down to pull her aboard even as the helicopter was lifting off. The pilot shouted to go as he pulled collective and increased power, and the Black Hawk clawed for altitude, rising out of the wadi while the Apache continued to suppress enemy positions. Monica collapsed onto the deck, breathing hard with adrenaline finally catching up with her. Morrison was staring at her with an expression somewhere between disbelief and profound respect, asking if she was the sniper who took out 20+ enemy fighters by herself. Monica managed a tired smile and said 23 confirmed, maybe a few more she didn't verify, and she had help, gesturing toward Corporal Davis who was lying on the opposite side of the helicopter with his shoulder bandaged, grinning despite the pain. Davis said she spotted him the first 10, then took a round and she had to work alone. Morrison shook his head slowly, saying 23 targets at 800 meters with a semi-auto rifle under fire while protecting his entire team, and he extended his hand, introducing himself as Jake Morrison and saying he needed to know who the hell she was. She identified herself as Staff Sergeant Monica Blake, 2nd Ranger Battalion, attached to Special Operations for Sniper Support Operations. Morrison tested the name and said yeah, that name was going in his after-action report with a strong recommendation for whatever medal they give for saving 8 SEALs from getting overrun while simultaneously engaging 30 enemy fighters solo. One of the wounded SEALs with his leg wrapped in blood-soaked bandages spoke up from where the medic was working on him, saying that's called a Medal of Honor, sir, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Monica waved that off, saying she was just doing her job. They were in trouble, she had the position and the weapon to help, and it was pretty simple math. Morrison laughed without humor, just exhausted respect, saying she engaged targets at ranges most snipers wouldn't attempt at a rate of fire most snipers couldn't maintain, and she did it while her own position was under assault, saying that's not math, not even skill, that's something else entirely. The helicopter banked toward the forward operating base with the Apache, escorting them. The crisis passed. Below, the battlefield was quiet with enemy fighters scattered or dead and the compound abandoned. The ambush that should have destroyed a SEAL team was instead destroyed by one shooter with a semi-automatic rifle and absolute refusal to accept defeat. The after-action review happened 3 days later in a secure briefing room at Bagram Airfield. Monica sat at a conference table with Morrison, his team, several officers from Joint Special Operations Command, and a colonel from Army Special Operations Command she didn't recognize. The tactical map on the wall showed the engagement area with red dots marking each enemy position Monica had engaged, 23 confirmed kills and an additional 7 probable kills where enemy fighters had been hit but bodies weren't recovered, totaling 30 enemy combatants neutralized by one shooter in approximately 45 minutes of sustained combat. Morrison was presenting the chronology, explaining that at 13:47 hours, his team was ambushed during their exfiltration from the target compound. They immediately took casualties with 3 wounded in the first 60 seconds, and enemy fire was coming from prepared positions in 3 directions, leaving them pinned with no cover and diminishing ammunition. He clicked to the next slide showing the timeline and said that at 13:52, Staff Sergeant Blake began engaging enemy positions from her Overwatch location 800 meters distant, and over the next 30 minutes, she systematically eliminated enemy machine gun positions, sniper hides, RPG teams, and mortar crews that were destroying his team. The colonel from Special Operations Command leaned forward and asked Staff Sergeant Blake what made her decide to engage at this scale, given that her official role was observation and limited precision fire support. Monica met his gaze directly and said, "Sir, she watched the SEAL team take casualties and get pinned in a position that was going to get them all killed. She had the weapon, the ammunition, and the position to change that tactical situation, and waiting for approval or sticking to her limited engagement parameters would have meant watching good men die while she had the capability to prevent it." The colonel stated that so she made a command decision to exceed her authority and engage 30 enemy fighters with a weapon system not optimized for that range or rate of fire. She confirmed, "Yes, sir." She assessed that the mission success and the lives of the SEAL team took priority over following doctrine that didn't account for the actual tactical situation. The colonel's expression was unreadable as he asked why she didn't immediately withdraw when her position was compromised and she was taking direct fire. She explained that the extraction helicopter was taking fire from positions she hadn't yet engaged. Morrison's team had critically wounded who needed immediate evacuation. She had ammunition remaining and clear shots on the anti-aircraft positions, so withdrawing would have meant the helicopter couldn't land and the wounded would have died. The colonel said so even when her own life was in immediate danger, she continued engaging enemy targets to protect the extraction, and she confirmed, "That's correct, sir." Morrison interjected, asking if he may, and said, "Sir, Blake's actions saved his entire team. She put herself at extreme risk to provide fire support that turned a catastrophic ambush into a successful mission, and every one of his men is alive because she refused to follow doctrine that would have left them to die." The colonel nodded slowly and said he wasn't criticizing, "Commander," he was trying to understand the decision-making process of someone who accomplishes what most people would consider impossible. He turned back to Monica and said, "Staff Sergeant, her shooting performance was analyzed by their marksmanship specialists, 23 confirmed kills at 800 meters with average engagement time of 90 seconds per target using a semi-automatic platform, and they tell him this represents skill that's in the top 1% of military snipers." She said she's had good training, sir. The colonel said she's had more than good training, and her file shows she's a distinguished expert in rifle marksmanship, completed Army Sniper School, Advanced Urban Sniper Course, and 3 combat deployments, but what's not in her file is where she learned to shoot like this. Monica hesitated, then decided truth was the best option and said her father was a competitive long-range shooter. "Sir, she grew up shooting 1,000-yard competitions, and when she joined the Army, she already had fundamentals that most people take years to develop, and military training refined those skills and taught her to apply them in combat situations." He asked about the decision-making, the ability to stay calm while engaging multiple targets under fire while her own position is being attacked. She said, "That's just training and experience, sir. You drill enough scenarios, practice enough stress shoots, deploy enough times, and eventually you develop the ability to compartmentalize the fear and focus on the technical problem, and each target was just a problem that needed solving, so she solved them in order of priority." The room was quiet for a moment, then the colonel stood and said, "Staff Sergeant Blake, he wanted to thank her for her service and her exceptional performance under circumstances that would have broken most soldiers, and her actions saved American lives and destroyed an enemy force that had been operating successfully in that area for months." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and said he was also there to offer her an opportunity. Joint Special Operations Command was developing a specialized unit that combines intelligence collection with direct action capabilities. They need personnel who can operate independently, make command decisions in fluid situations, and accomplish missions that conventional doctrine doesn't cover, and her performance in this engagement suggests she's exactly the kind of operator they're looking for. Monica glanced at Morrison, who was watching with interest, and asked, "What kind of unit, sir?" The colonel said, "The kind that doesn't officially exist, the kind that works problems other people can't solve, the kind that needs people who think like she does with mission first, doctrine second, results always." He slid the folder across the table and said to read this when she has privacy. If she's interested, there's a phone number. The training is brutal, the missions are dangerous, and she'll never be able to talk about what she does, but she'll be working with the best and making a difference in ways conventional forces can't. After the colonel left, Morrison approached Monica with a grin and said so she's a secret badass who just happens to be assigned to boring observation missions. She said she's a sniper who got attached to SEAL operations because someone thought she could contribute, and turns out they were right. Morrison said Blake, she didn't just contribute, she saved his entire team while fighting off 30 enemy combatants by herself. The guys are calling her the gunfighter now, and they want to know when she's available for more operations. Monica smiled and said to tell them she's considering a career change, but she appreciates the respect. Morrison said she's earned more than respect, she's earned a place in SEAL team history as the Army sniper who refuses to quit no matter how bad the odds, and he extended his hand, saying if she ever needs anything, and he means anything, she should call him because his team owes her their lives, and that's a debt they don't forget. 6 months later, Monica Blake was running through an obstacle course designed to break candidates who didn't have the right combination of intelligence, physical capability, and psychological resilience. She was one of 2 women in a class of 30 and the only candidate who'd been recruited specifically because she'd accomplished something the selection cadre considered tactically impossible. The instructor watching her complete a precision shooting evolution under stress made a note in his evaluation book, Blake, exceptional skills confirmed, recommended for advanced placement, candidate has already proven she can accomplish the impossible when it matters, just needs to learn their specific methodologies. Years later, when instructors taught advanced precision marksmanship, they used the case study of Staff Sergeant Monica Blake, who engaged 23 enemy fighters at 800 meters in 45 minutes using a semi-automatic rifle while her own position was under assault. The lesson wasn't about the technical aspects of long-range shooting, though those were impressive. The lesson was about making the hard choice to act when conventional wisdom said to wait, about refusing to accept defeat when accepting would be easier, about understanding that sometimes one person with the right skills and absolute determination can change the outcome of a battle everyone else has already written off as lost, and most importantly about the reality that the most dangerous operator in the fight might be the one everyone underestimated right up until she started dropping enemy targets at ranges they didn't think were possible while under fire from multiple directions. Staff Sergeant Monica Blake proved something that day on that Afghan ridgeline. When someone's life depends on you, impossible becomes irrelevant, you find the skill, you take the shot, and you keep shooting until either the threat is destroyed or you're out of ammunition, and sometimes 20 rounds is exactly enough to change everything.